Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. Today I'm joined by my buddy Justin Ray. We've been in business together. We've become really good friends. Justin's the founder of Cinch. He's also a husband, father of four, avid adventurer, and a lifelong entrepreneur. Justin started his first company while attending the University of Florida, flinging pamphlets. He
Go
then took the
Gators.
mark. He then took the marketing prowess and hustle from that experience to launch several other ventures, doing some professional photography as well until he eventually put it all into a multi-million dollar tech startup called Cinch. Cinch is focused on aggregating data and making it actionable for increased customer lifetime value. Justin and I have worked together and graduated together from the University of Utah's inaugural Master of Business Creation program. I'm really excited to have you on, Justin. It's great to connect, kind of talk through, learn a little bit about what you're up to, and hopefully teach our listeners and viewers a little bit about starting a company. So, how are you
Yeah,
today?
good. Super good to be here. Glad and excited to see you doing this.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. We like to lean into things so we can learn, just satisfy our curiosities, right? So, early on in the days of Cinch, I was alongside you, helping kind of build some of the marketing and sales funnels and some of those things along the way. But kind of tell us, what's it like to build a full blown tech startup? Like, you're the real deal now.
I still don't feel like I'm the real deal. That's the truth. It's, I mean, it just, grows on you. It's line upon line, just step by step, right? You slowly get to that point, and just it's a different, every day it's different, but it's definitely exciting, very enjoyable. There's definitely times when it's not so enjoyable as well, but um, it doesn't feel any different, right? Than you still have fires, and I think that's probably the thing I've started to realize is always the truth, is that when you start a company and you're trying to grow fast and you're trying to accomplish things that are not often accomplished, you always have something on fire. Something's always broken, and you've got to just get into the mindset of, something else is going to break today. I'm not going to let it stress me out more than it normally should, and I've got to figure out how I'm going to fix it and who on the team is going to help me fix it. So that's probably the takeaway I take from that.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of walk through how you got to where you're at today. So, take us back to your college days. What what was the itch you had to scratch? Like where did that go? What got you into like, okay, I'm gonna go do my own thing?
Yeah. As I like just right now thinking about it, I was fortunate enough to live in a house that always had a computer. So I know for kids these days, that's just a given. But growing up and living in the 80s, not everybody had computers. And my dad had a computer since before I was born, and they were just a normal part of the household. And so the idea of tech and building computers was just something growing up. I remember Christmases getting so excited for, oh, what's the latest RAM? Is dad gonna get me a piece of, a new RAM chip that I can put a sim, like back in the day, you had DIM and SIM, and SIM was a thing and whatever, right? You drop these into your computer and be like, yes, I can play a new game, or I can do this other thing, right? And so just growing up in the ability and having that tech there was always something that led me to wanting to and believing that you could do these certain things, right? And so I went into college expecting, I could do some engineering. I wanted to build a business, and I wanted to build new tech. And honestly, hardware tech is very hard, and software tech is a lot easier. So I've learned that through Cinch especially. But the University of Florida, I was able to build my first company, and that was hardware. I built a home automation system that was voice activated. You could say sunray system, turn on the lights, or sunray system mood setting, or whatever it was, right? And control different features back then.
So you
And
were Alexa before Alexa was cool.
2006, 2007, that was the time. Yeah. So I needed to come up with a better name, but Sunray System was, what it was. But that was where it really got started, right? So that's where the itch and started the business. Prior to that, I'd done like lawn service with friends on the block and a few things along those lines. But but building a real company and being able to sell it's what really got things going.
Awesome. Yeah, I was writing an article the other day about just kind of how I grew up, right? Like thinking about, okay, create, like my dad was an electrical engineer, so there were radio parts, transistors, transformers, everything all around the house all the time, right? And I remember building my first computer, good old 386, right? Like,
Yeah,
and it probably had like 5 mega RAM. I don't know, whatever it was at the time, right? Like
yeah,
it was probably even K's, right? Like, um, and the initial one had a floppy drive, and I remember being able to upgrade that to then we got a Pentium 2, and it was running Windows 95 with a CD-ROM drive. Like
oh yeah,
that was awesome, right? Like, so
yeah,
yeah, it's great, like where we've come today, right? Like, how many kids are how like there are still computer hobbyists out there, but like I feel like in our era, it was kind of commonplace to have
yeah,
computer parts. Like you'd run down to the computer store and you just go say, "Hey, I need this RAM chip, or I need a new motherboard," or like you just buy
yeah,
parts off the rack. And I was down at this was in just off my street. Like I was over there the other day, but now it's a Simply Mac, right? Like it's just a Mac retail
yeah,
store, and it's not. I can't go buy parts anymore, right? And you buy computers, and they're all fully enclosed and locked, and the experimentation is
yeah.
depleted quite a bit, right? So,
Our,
oh
our kids very much miss that opportunity, I think, right? Is the like the as technology evolved, it was we got to see it, we got to know how it worked and plugged it in, and that was just cool, right? Like, but nowadays, yeah, it's very different. I fortunately have computers laying around still at home, so I can show my kids that, but they don't get into it
yeah,
because for them, it's not
yeah,
like there's not that drive of I can do something new.
right. No,
Oh, good.
I
Yeah.
like I remember taking apart calculators, right? Like we'd be at school and we'd be like, okay, this calculator
Yeah.
shot or whatever. Like, let's take it apart, right? And I did have the privilege, like my daughter, we had old iPhones sitting around the house, and she's like, "Dad, I want to take this apart. I want to take this apart." I was like, "Okay, go rip it apart. Like, go for it." They're not as easy to get apart as like
Oh,
once you
yeah.
rip it apart, they don't go back together.
Yeah.
but I remember my
It's,
first HP tablet, and I cracked the screen on it, and it was so easy to go to eBay, buy a replacement screen and swap
yeah.
that thing out. Now you got to go to some specialist store or whatever to swap out these screens, right? Like it's not the same anymore for sure. But
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, though, the future, the right to repair. I'm not sure if you've like been up to speed on these Right to Repair Act and the different states applying the right to repair law. It's really cool though because as far as I understand it, the right to repair actually came out of farmers, where John Deere got really aggressive at putting together, hey, this is if you want to repair these complicated computers or tractors with computers in them and all the RTK technology, RKT, whatever that might be. Yeah. You had to have a John Deere technician come out, right?
yeah,
And they might be like 2 months behind, and 2 months can ruin your entire season if you can't fix that tractor and it's just sitting out in a field. And maybe someone would have to fact check me on that history, but I definitely know those are scenarios that have created the right to repair is where somebody needs to be able to, a third party vendor or an individual themselves needs to be able to learn and know and have access to be able to fix these things. And I think it's going to be really cool because as those laws, Utah has a similar law to that now. And I know that there are laws that are coming to the federal government in similar aspects to that. I think it's going to really be cool to see how that changes. If I could take my phone apart and actually pop in a new processor and add new cameras to it later, sure, I might have to do some soldering, but if I could do it, that'd be pretty cool.
it it can be right, but it's interesting because there is a trade off too, though. Like because if it's repairable, or if I'm able to take it apart and upgrade it, now you're talking about it's probably going to be larger, it's probably going to be heavier, right? Like because if you look at an iPhone, right? Like you look at the iPhone 16, iPhone 15, whatever, right? Like there's like it's all like machine crafted to where it's all just so tight to make it the size that it is. Whereas
Yeah.
if I've got to put screws in and then I've got to have places for those screw holder, right? Like all of that stuff, now that's got to expand the size of the phone. Like it's gonna be a little thicker, it's gonna be bigger. Like so at what point,
Yeah.
right? Like where do we find that balance? And because I grew up a hobbyist, right? Like kind of taking these things apart as we talked about, right? Like but now I just want to buy something, have it work. But unfortunately, what that also does to us is it creates disposability, right?
Yeah.
Like my iPhone 15 is going to be great for 2 to 3 years, and then I'm going to be looking for the 18 or the 17, right? And and that's the way that I'm going to upgrade. Well, what happens to my 15? Well, okay, maybe my 15 goes to somebody else, but where's the iPhone 6s of today, right?
Yeah.
Like they're being recycled, hopefully, right? Like or sitting in
Yeah.
somebody's drawer somewhere or what, right? Like versus if
Yeah.
I could just upgrade that, right? But technology is going so fast that it's like, okay, how do I keep up with that, right? Like and so there is this tricky balance, right? Like okay, I want
Yeah.
the sleekness, I want the fine, I want the pristine, I want the look, I want the appeal, and but I also want it to last a really long time,
Yeah.
hypothetically, right? Like I just got a new iPad Pro and like I want it to last a long time, but it's going to be outdated in 18 months, right? Like
Yeah.
and and there's not anything I can do to upgrade it other than buy a new one, right? Like
Yeah.
at least with a laptop, like even a MacBook, I can upgrade the RAM maybe sometimes, right? Like even that's becoming harder to do, but it's still possible. But that's all I
Yeah.
can upgrade. I can't upgrade the chipset, right? Like I can't put a new motherboard in there. Like I could use the same shell, I could use the same CD-ROM drive, I could use the same RAM chips even if I wanted to back in the 90s when I'd upgrade my motherboard, right? Like
Yeah.
and I didn't have to go buy a whole new computer. I just needed a motherboard and a new chipset, right? Like, and I was good to go. So, yeah, it's interesting,
Yeah.
but also my computer was huge, right? Like, it was a big like 2 foot by 6 inch, right,
Yeah.
box.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah. Those big towers. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, kind of crazy,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think
It'll be
we could
fun
have
to
a
see how it changes. Yeah.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think like as we look at the automotive industry, right? Like and especially what you're talking about, right? Like in agriculture, how important is it to keep your machines running, right? Like even in business
Yeah.
today, right? Like I got to keep my computer running, right?
Yeah.
But for me to go down to the store and spend another $1,500, 2 grand on a new computer for a business, like okay, like that's not detrimental. But as a farmer, to go spend another 100 grand on a tractor, like I can't
Yeah.
do that, right? Like that doesn't make sense.
Yep.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where all of that kind of shakes and what happens because of it. Because there's going to be sacrifices made on one side or the other, I think. But super
Yeah.
interesting. So you're in the hardware, and then you kind of like hardware was hard. Why do you feel like you didn't like? Were you ahead of the curve? Like, why do you feel like you didn't get the traction? Because nowadays, like, you walk into most homes in the United States, and I can say, "Hey, Echo." I'm not gonna say it because it'll turn off my lights, right? But hey, Echo, turn on my lights or turn off my lights, right? Like, hey, Echo, set my temperature to 71 degrees, right? And like,
Yeah.
I don't even have to walk up to the thermostat. Like, I feel like we're creating a little Wally culture, but here we are.
Don't
but
worry,
so
Samsung's
why do you
lit
feel
now.
like you had to move away from that?
Yeah. Well, just fun note. Samsung's got Bali. Is their little robot. Hope be coming out. Maybe I don't know. It's supposed to come out this year, but it'll be a fun one. Roll around, totally do all the same things. But no, I think one of the things about as I look at my past, I feel like I've actually been a little early to industries, a little too early, right? And that's where I was with that company being home automation or voice activated really early. And then after not long after that, I tried to start in 2000. 7 and 8, I was trying to start a video streaming using the cloud, using some peer-to-peer networks, and start a video streaming company. And I had a real hard time getting investors to buy in on the idea. And maybe it's just because I'm a terrible person at pitching the ideas and the vision here. But in that one, I was trying to get investors on board, right? And I had a really hard time pitching the idea that data is going to be in the cloud, right? We're going to, at that time we weren't even calling it the cloud. We were calling, data is going to be on these remote servers, and
Yeah.
we can share these, but you could have these peer-to-peer networks that, I mean, you had LimeWire and Grokster and Napster and all these other tools that people were at this point they were actually able to stream audio from because we could move fast enough, right? And
Yep.
so the concept was ultimately, could we do videos in the cloud or videos on the peer-to-peer network and let people be able to watch these and purchase them. And at the time, Netflix was still sending discs, had no concept of this. Hulu wasn't around. Video, Amazon Video didn't exist, or Prime Video, excuse me, didn't exist. And so that was again a little too early to the curve. Couldn't get people on board. And then kind of tried a few other little things between here and there. And the downturn of the economy in 2009 changed a whole lot. But 2012, I was back to trying to use data science to process and analyze consumer behavior. And I think this one I've timed right. Right, we got in, we're at the right time. People understand how to use data, how to use automation, and the value of that. How AI can be applied not just in a generative way, but how it can be applied in a predictive way. Right, and my take is everybody can see the generative AI and what generative AI is doing for the world with Chat GPT, but less so people see what predictive AI can do. And my take is that predictive AI is actually what is going to really make the biggest change, right? Is being able to predict future outcomes based on today's outcome, or the past, are what will really make the biggest leaps in value when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think that's powerful, right? Like we've talked a lot about kind of predicting behavior, right? And that's really at the core of what Cinch is trying to accomplish, right? Is being able to predict behavior to send the right message to the right person at the right time, right? Like, give us. We haven't kind of gone into this, so give us an overview of what Cinch is, and then I want to come back to a couple of things that you hit on there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So Cinch is a data science and marketing automation tool. We ingest all of the data from the consumer's behavior that we can get with a business. So typically that's their transactional data. Any other data that we can get, we'd love to get connected to that and bring that in. We then use a machine learning process to be able to match the data up in between the customer data. So we know, hey, if we have like this customer and multiple different data sources, we can bring that in. It's all matched together, and that really helps us have really good and clean data, which is absolutely necessary when you start to run data science models, especially when you're trying to predict future behavior, right? So we have this good, clean data, and then we have an automation to good, clean data that we actually run the data science on, create predictive models. Um, a fun one that we're just working on and soon to wrap up and deliver is like predicting purchases. So if you're purchasing shoes, maybe I buy shoes at a 1 year interval, you buy shoes at a 6 month interval. We can start to predict that and change when we're communicating with people. And so that we take that data and we push that into our automation layer. And then the automation layer would say, okay, let's send an email, a text, let's send a postcard, let's push somebody into Facebook and Google and other digital ad audience campaigns. We can automate sending gifts to customers or whatever it might be. We can automate those all based off of predicted behaviors or behaviors that we can see and put into similar to traditional automation. So that's essentially what Cinch
Yeah.
does. But we take the results of that, put it right back into our data models, and we create new iterations on predicting customer behavior.
Right. And you guys have had a lot of success in the automotive industry, right? Specifically oil change, some of that stuff, right? And you obviously have expanded from there and been able to help several other industries. But I think like what's interesting to me, right? There's a lot of conversation around personalization, right? Especially when we
Yeah.
talk about email automation. And personalization is super interesting. I saw an email a couple days ago that when does personalization become too personal? And
Yeah.
and I think like and that's a really interesting question, right? Like, and again, going back to trade-offs, right? Like there are trade-offs here, right? But having started a shoe company, having marketed for a shoe company for quite some time, right? Like you bring up the shoe idea or that that story, right? And looking at that narrative, right? Like I'm not going to burn through my email list as quickly or as aggressively if I know the trends of people, right? Like if I know their behaviors, if I know their trends, right? Because and we've talked about this a lot, right? Like I don't I don't need to try to hit somebody every week to try to sell them a road running shoe if all they're buying is trail shoes. Yeah, I want to hit them once in a while because maybe they're buying road shoes from somebody else,
Yeah.
but I don't need to hit them all the time, right? Like, but if I have somebody that's buying shoes every couple weeks, then okay, yeah, I want to hit them every week, right? Like, okay, let's make sure you see what's new, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that buys shoes that often, but like I loved the running shoe world because it was great lifetime value, right? Like if I can acquire a customer, I knew in most cases that customer was going to come back to me and buy shoes from me 5 to 10 times that year, right? Like because the average runner runs through a pair of shoes every 300 to 500 miles. If they're training for a marathon, they're running 70 to 100 miles a week. Well, that's a new pair of shoes every 3 to 4 weeks, right? Like,
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
great, right? Like, that's 12 pairs of shoes every year.
Yeah.
And they're usually cycling between a couple different pairs of shoes, and they might not just be running on the road, they're also running on the trail. Maybe they've got a racing flag, right? Like there's just a lot of opportunity in the running shoe
Yeah.
world. And so, but timing and specificity, right? Like there's a lot of value to that because then I can send messages that are relevant. I can send
Yep.
messages that are relevant at the right time, right? This is why I think you guys have had a ton of success in oil and lube, right? Like in the quick lube game because okay, I can predict when you based on your driving habits and the data that I have, I can predict when you're due for your next oil change and I can start hitting you up a few days or a week and a half before that's due, right?
Yeah.
Versus just flooding your inbox all the time. And then you're
Yeah.
like, I'm tired of seeing these, and they unsubscribe, right? And then now you've lost them, right? They're going somewhere else. Instead of Jiffy Lube, they're going to Monkey Wrench or whatever, like Valvoline or any of these others, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
um,
No, that's exactly it, right? Is like with your example with the shoes, if we have that data that we know and we can start to see that people are buying shoes that often, like we can start to predict. And maybe what we want to do is we can even start to include some cross selling. Maybe we've got a partner, or maybe we've got other goods that are really great for a marathon runner, right? So
right.
we start to identify how often they're buying shoes. We know that they're same size shoes, same style. Maybe it's the exact same shoe every time, right? So it gives us the ability to like really personalize that and dive into, hey, are you training for a marathon? Maybe we even send them a text message and says, hey, are you training for a marathon? And they reply back, yes. That can go into their customer profile. And we know that they're at least training for a marathon now. And we can start to feed them more information. Maybe the content of our email is information about training for marathons. Maybe we follow up with another question in that text chain, and we can say something like, is this your first marathon, or how many marathons have you done, right? As soon as they
Yep.
can answer that, we can put that back into their profile, and it allows us to personalize that content and create valuable information when we do send that email, right? It's not just about how can I send, the marketing, what are the shoes you should buy, or what's the cross sell, but if I can give the customer the ability to say, hey, here's some content that's going to help you based on what we know is going on and what you've shared with us in your life right now, they're going to engage with that a whole lot more, right?
Yep.
As opposed to, one of my favorite shoe brands who loves to send emails like once at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and I unsubscribe very quickly. Every time I sign back up to just see, hey, what's the subscription like now? Oh, it's every week still, right? And I unsubscribe again, right? And they probably could do a better job at marketing to me based off of that, but they don't get to text me, they don't get to email me, and they're one of my favorite brands. I'm more than willing to drop their name with anybody and say, hey, now that I'm talking about their poor marketing strategy, I won't drop their name, but we'll we could
And
definitely help them a
we
lot.
can go deliver this to their CMO and say, hey, like you guys
We
got to get your act
should.
together.
We should. Yeah. But if they had that, they could recognize, okay, why do I love their shoes? Right? What is it? Okay. I've actually bought their shoes for my kids now and absolutely love it. And I will buy more shoes more often because of that, because they've got that opportunity. But that's a space where you want to be more respectful and targeted with why you're marketing people, right? Or maybe not even market to them, send them information that can be valuable to them and their life, right?
Yeah, and in your case, right? Like, okay, you know that I'm buying shoes on a regular cadence, right? I'm buying shoes for my family. You've got all my data. Just tell me when a new shoe's coming out, right? Like, or let me
Yeah,
know when a new colorway drops or of the shoe that I buy the most often or something like that, right? Like,
yeah,
and the challenge is, right, like at the end of the day, like you're building a data platform that you've built it, right? Like it's live, it's out there that does this. But at the end of the day, marketers are lazy.
yeah.
They don't want to create all the content for all those different journeys and flows, right? Like that takes too much work.
Dude,
But
there's some like great tools you can use now with using AI and RSS feeds to be able to populate content that's trustworthy and that you can plug in there. But dude, I'll tell you, like, man, we've got some really cool models that we've been able to build now and predicting, hey, if the first purchase that a customer buys is this product, then we expect within 90 days they're going to buy this product. You should start selling it to them at this day. And that's on like companies that have more broad SKUs, right? And product mix. Uh, what should you start marketing to them, right? Instead of marketing just broadly, this is what we're sending out to everybody. The first item they bought was this, the most likely to buy this next, right?
yeah,
Make sure that we include that information. And being able to change up that product mix in how you communicate to those customers is very valuable. And we're just now starting to break into doing a lot more of that in retail than we've been in automotive and home services, as you mentioned, and starting to do that in a lot more of other spaces now.
yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a couple of things. Like I want to come back to a couple of things that you brought up earlier and hit on these because I think for our listeners, like this is really important to look at. If anybody's out there thinking of starting a business or in the throes of it, right? Like sometimes often the first hit doesn't work, right? Like and and that like the things that you were coming up with, the things that you were developing, the ideas that you had, go like that proves this visionary concept, right? Like you have vision for things that are coming down the road, down the pipe, right? Like and you're way ahead of the game. And sometimes that's really hard to get people to say, okay, like I'm gonna buy in, right? Like, okay, here's you a couple $1 million to get this thing off the ground, right? Like,
Yeah,
and that's a really hard thing to accomplish, right? Like being ahead of the curve is challenging. It's hard, right? Like Blockbuster was laughing at Netflix for how long, right? Like, you guys, this is never gonna stick. Sending out DVDs in the mail, like that's not gonna work. Where's Blockbuster? Bend,
yeah,
Oregon, and that's it, right? Like,
yeah,
you got one location left, and now it's because it's privately owned, right? Like Blockbuster's gone. They tried to get into the streaming gate. They tried to get into all,
yeah.
but it was way too late, right? But
But
sometimes it can
Netflix
be,
was a good example because they then made the transition to streaming and they
yeah,
did a great job at transitioning
yep,
that, right? They made
absolutely.
that jump. Yeah.
Yeah, they were able to see the writing on the wall and make that shift, right? And they were able to run it simultaneously for a really long time and do
Yeah.
it successfully, right? To where they were sending out DVDs, but they were also providing streaming content. And and at first the streaming content was kind of the like, do I really like is that worth me spending money on stream, right? Like but you
Yeah.
usually got the package as a package deal so you could still get your DVDs and then dabble in what they were doing. But eventually it got to where they were pretty now, right? Like they're producing a lot of great content that is their
Yeah.
own in-house content in addition to the whole library of content from other providers that they
Yeah.
have, right? And we see like and now it's like it's the streaming wars now, right? Like between
Yeah.
Disney Plus and and Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and all of these, right? So
Yeah. Max and
Apple TV
Hulu.
Plus,
Yep.
Max, right? Like all of that.
Yep.
But so I think it's interesting, right? So you shift from hardware, you go look at streaming, that doesn't stick. Like at what point did you feel like, okay, like I just need to kind of let go and go get a full-time job? Was it ever, or were there those thoughts of like
Yeah. There
you
was a
kind of
period of
had the
time, but it's
you kind of
short.
had the luxury of being single for a little longer than some of us.
That's
But
true.
so you didn't have a family that you needed to provide for at this time, but what was going like was there this thought of like, okay, maybe I do need to grow up and just get a full-time 9 to 5?
You know, you bring that in with dating, and that's very much, the idea of an entrepreneur. I think I probably was a little different than a lot of entrepreneurs because I at least had built enough made a good financial decisions that I had rental properties and real estate that was able to float me in different aspects, right? So while my cash flow at times might have been incredibly tight, I didn't necessarily, I could live very meagerly, and that's also was maybe a talent in and of itself. But by just basically taking each of those steps, it did make dating really interesting because I always did want to shy away on dates and be like, oh yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, or oh yeah, I started this business, or I work for myself, or whatever it might be. Because during that time, it felt like everybody was doing that, living in their parents' basement, and it was really just a sign for I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, and I'm failing to launch type of thing, right? And actually, when I met my wife, I was like, okay, how am I going to approach this? But I had my own company and I was making, well into six figures, and we had a good business running, right? And it still kind of felt like I was gonna fight that uphill battle of, yeah, no, first impression, that's not the entrepreneur in somebody's basement running this, right? Um, but yeah, there were definitely times in there where it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Do I go get a job somewhere in between this? Do I like what am I gonna do? Right? Was really always a big question. But it was just let's try to wing this and make it happen.
Fair enough. Yeah. No,
So
there's a lot of risk, right? In starting your own company, there's a lot of calculated risk. I think diversifying in certain ways can be a powerful thing. If you can hit on something early to get at least some, have some savings, some stuff built up, right? That can become
yeah,
powerful. My story is a little bit different. I lost lost a lot in starting my company, right? And there was like it was yeah, it took its toll a bit, right? But
yeah,
um, I think another thing too, right? Like, so you mentioned in 2012, right? So you and I met, I think it was 2017 is when we first met. It was shortly after I left Ultra. A buddy connected us, was like, hey, you guys should connect. Like, Justin's building this thing that could be really awesome. We got together, started working on it. But at that time, you were really 5 years down the line on this thing, right? And you talk about how you had a six-figure income, but that income was coming from the early days of what Cinch started out as, which essentially was kind of a hodgepodge methodology of sending out postcards for Quick Lube. And then it
yeah,
evolved into what it is today. Now, and I think an important thing to hit on that, right? Like, is we're 12 years later, and now Cinch is getting really good traction out there, right? Like,
yeah.
and
I think I definitely want to emphasize that it was two different companies. So
sure,
2012 was one company, but it was the same idea, right? The general concept. And what was happening is at that point we were using data science and we were running a whole bunch of things in the back end and doing some professional services. The difference now with Cinch is we took some of those same learnings, the things that you're talking about there, and we created a good user interface that allows the users to, we'd run into in that company scenarios where a customer would say, hey, I want to send postcards this way. And it was enough of a deviant from the process that we had with everybody else that we would actually have to write in the code, if customer is this, then do this. And we're going to have these options or we're going to do this, right? And we started getting enough of those that every time we had to do that, we'd have to talk to a developer, have the developer jump in, go change that. Or maybe we were able to tweak it in the data, and that would be something I was able to do. But um, we ran into enough of those problems that was, how do we take this and make it so the customer can get what they want and create the experience they want for for their customers, in a low code, no code type of way, right? And that's really where Cinch was born, was how do we take all of the same data science, how do we take more data science and we put that into a place that people can build and put that together. And so yeah, to your point though, it's I think a lot of times businesses build on, you get ideas from one business and that gives you the opportunity to build a new business, and or gives you an idea of a new opportunity that maybe you didn't see before, right? And that's
Yep.
probably the biggest key, was that we had to keep going back and rebuilding to allow these different campaigns the way that our customers wanted. And Cinch is built in a way that it allows our customers to really get the flexibility that they want entirely out of the different campaigns, or as we call journeys at Cinch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have this challenge, this like mindset of entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs today where it's like, oh, I just need to go develop the app or the software or the product and I'll be a multimillionaire overnight, right? Like I just get on Shark
Yeah.
Tank and whatever, right? Like and we have this really jaded idea or concept of what it takes to really build a business because once you've heard about a business, that business has probably been running and operating in some form or fashion for at least a half a decade.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, right? Like they don't recognize that okay, that business has been running, right? Like before you got your first true outside investment and were able to go get your first office, like you'd been in business as Cinch for really what, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah. When oh, so we really started Cinch. The concept of Cinch and the idea was really launched in 2016. And then 2017 is when we really committed to the direction we wanted to go. We didn't find our CTO, Chris London, to join our team until 2018. And so him jumping on board in the fall of 2018 led to us being able to get the product out in 2019. And then 2019 was trying to figure out how we really make that product market fit and dial in some things. And then 2020 through, COVID, massive wrenches in different directions. And we didn't raise our first round of capital really until 2021, December
Yeah.
2021. We had at that point crossed $1 million in annual revenue, and kind of taken that approach. So,
Yeah.
you
So
know, an example actually, I to your point on this, like time it takes, um, live view technologies, they're kind of all the rage right now, right? Do you know when live view launched, when they founded?
I want it was either late aughts or early teens, right? Like actually no,
No,
it was before that.
it's 2005,
Yeah.
right? um, it was, yeah, so it was
I
like,
looked them up the other day and so I had kind of had that. But yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it's that no, like it's 19 years ago, right? Like that's
Yeah.
and really like most people are just starting to hear about them over the last few years, right? Like they
Yep.
now have a partnership with the Utah Jazz and so that's definitely given them more awareness and some of that, right? But yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's
And Qualtrics, I mean, how long, what was that? That was like a, how long was that a run? I mean, I want to say that was like a 14-year run before they sold,
yeah,
right?
Ryan was doing stuff for quite some time, right? Like
Yeah. Let's
so
see.
yeah. Well, and
Qualtrics.
that was literally a project to keep him and his dad occupied while his I think it was while his dad was struggling with cancer or something like that. Like it was something they
Huh.
could do together and spend some time together. Like, and it became
Yeah.
Qualtrics, right? Like,
Yeah. So
so
2002, at least according to the quick search for Qualtrics, right? And the time it took for them to actually turn into that multi-billion dollar company, right? To, I mean,
yep,
get that all rolling. So. so yeah, these things don't happen overnight, and it definitely seems like they do, right? People, and very few do, right? Even Facebook,
Yeah,
who had like a massive quick growth, was still a good amount of time before it reached that $1 billion time
I
period.
think it was still 4 years before they opened it outside of college campuses.
Oh,
I think it was
yeah,
3 or 4 years after he actually started it, right, in his dorm room, that they then
yeah,
went outside of .edu emails.
huh,
Because early on, like if you'd heard of Facebook, the only way you could get access was to have an edu email. It started as just an intranet essentially on Harvard's campus, and they got a few other campuses. But to your point, right? Like it was a long time, relatively speaking, a lot longer than we think, right? Like we think, oh, Mark Zuckerberg was an overnight success, right? Like no,
yeah,
and yes, today it's a lot faster to revenue than it was 30, 40 years ago, right? Like you look at somebody like Steve
yeah,
Jobs and how long did that take to get Apple off the ground, and then he got ousted, and then they struggled, and then he came back, and Apple didn't become the success that Apple is really until they launched the iPod in the 2000s, right? Like
yeah,
they were like they were making a lot of money, right? Like they were still like they were the number 2 computer company,
yeah,
right? But like becoming what we recognize as like Apple, right? Like it was
yep,
really 25 years after they'd been
yeah,
around before it like became like, okay, Apple is like that's Apple, right? Like
yeah,
so
yep,
um no, it's yeah. So but to hit that point home, right? Like it takes time, and
yeah,
expect it to take time. And so as you kind of have shifted now, right, from being kind of in that solo or duo entrepreneur mode to now running a business, how has that affected your life dynamic? How has that affected just who you are mentally? Like what has that done for like what has that done to you or for you over the last few years?
to me is definitely a good way to put it. Oh man, you definitely have to sacrifice when you're making different choices, right? And for me, the sacrifice ended up being a lot of outdoors activities and exercise. I gave that up, which you got to make a decision, and that was maybe the wrong decision. But I did choose my family. I chose a few other aspects of my life, and religion and work and family basically became my all my life could have time for. But but yeah, it's actually a lot harder to be a CEO, and actually even harder to go from a founder to CEO than I thought it was going to be. That's
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest things that I've learned, right? I hired a coach, come in, help me understand that process, go through that process, and I think I'm still learning what it takes to be a CEO and how to do that. But and you probably always are, but it that was pretty hard. Um,
What would you say has
and
been the hardest aspect of making that shift? What's been the hardest thing about making that shift?
yeah, I mean, going from the fact that you're the guy who does everything, I mean, down to even cleaning the toilets, to now I'm the guy who does very few things, but I still need to have my fingers in everything, right? And so how do you manage that balance? How do you hire people that you trust and you can have confidence in, right? And ensuring that you do have that and giving that, basically passing that baton and trusting the success is a pretty difficult thing to do. And so, um, having this coach has really helped me. And I'll give a shout out to Nathan Tanner on that one. Shoot, he'd be a good one to jump on your
Cool.
your podcast here too at some point. But he's definitely helped out a lot. But it really comes down to like how do you let go of some of these things that you've done, and there's always this debate too. Like I saw not too long ago a post that basically said, you let go of these things, but at the same time, you're not really micromanaging, but you still got to be involved in everything because that's what really keeps everything so tight and tied together, right?
Yeah.
And And yeah, I don't know if that fully answered that question, but yeah, it's a tough transition.
So when you're stepping out of a lot of this stuff, right? And you're letting other people manage it, right? So you're delegating so much of what you used to do, right?
Yeah.
Like some of that cleaning the toilets, you're probably like, "Oh good. I don't have to do
Yeah.
that," right? Like let somebody else handle that. That one you probably don't miss very much.
No.
But
Yeah.
how do you stay sharp on all of these other things, right? Like, and because now, like, I think CEOs, especially in today's world, are the great generalists, right? Like, and you have to be a generalist. You have to kind of have an understanding of every aspect of your business to some degree, right? Like, you're not going to
Yeah.
be in there typing code, right? Like, you're not going to go tell Chris, "Oh, you missed this line
No.
of code," right?
Yeah.
Like, but you're gonna know enough that I like, okay, like, so how do you stay sharp on all of
I
that?
mean, with my team and what we do one-on-ones, good team meetings and trying to share that. But one-on-ones are the biggest place that I get is just hearing from the executive leadership, like what's going on, what are they doing? Maybe I would probably even just say not even just executive leadership, but the people that report to me, right? Um, and I've heard that really good structure comes down to understanding and knowing what do I as a CEO need to be aware of today, right? So if we're working on some specific thing and I need somebody to report directly to me that might skip two or three different levels and it might be atypical, but that person needs to report to me so I can get that information the most, right? That's probably something you need to org structure wise set up so that you can be getting that direct report and understanding what's going on. Now, Cinch is small enough still that it's pretty easy to just have the leadership reporting to me, and I report to talking to them about that directly in one-on-ones, right? But yeah, that's probably the most valuable place for me is a good one-on-one where I hear from them and I can ask them how things are going.
Yeah, no, that's good. Got to keep your pulse on all of it, right? Um, so what would you say is your greatest failure, Justin?
Greatest failure. I mean, there's a lot of ways to define greatest failure, I think. Is that the worst failure? Is that the failure that actually led you to something great? Is that
How do you want to
the
define it?
greatest lesson? I don't know. I think that for me, a lot of times when it comes to thinking about failure, um, it's just a step, and I don't know that it's something. It's not like I carry a regret, right? Like, um, what's my biggest regret? I don't know. I think if I really were to say regrets, mostly come from how I handle relationship aspects, right? I do regret some things that might come down to how those relationships are interpersonally. But if it comes to business side of things, there's definitely opportunities I missed, right? I think that a year ago, Cinch should have made a pivot that we didn't actually pivot, that now I'm like totally convinced this is what we needed to do, right? Who knows? Maybe we did miss something. But when I look back at my life, I feel like most of the path that we've had, that I've had and Cinch has had, have led us to a good place now, right? And we just live in a time when there's so many really great opportunities and places out there to do things that it's hard to really feel like there's failure, right? That's kind of where I'd answer that, because I don't know that I could answer specifically that there is a great failure um, out there.
That's fair. I like to throw that question out there. Most people don't really have an answer for it. I love, like, one of the themes that has come up so far is just how much we grow through our failures, right? And I think
Yeah,
whenever you talk to somebody that is successful, that has been able to accomplish a lot of things, that's what we learn, right? Is that failure is really a stepping stone to the next
yeah.
success. So what would you say is your greatest accomplishment?
Oh, well, if my kids turn out all right, I think that's where it'll be. But um, from a more pragmatic view of it, is I think that raising the next generation and helping them understand how we can, as a society and as people, continue to treat other people as people and treat them well, and keep society from breaking itself down, right? Destroying itself, I think is what I can do in that aspect is what I would view as some of my greatest accomplishments.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to wrap up with a few rapid fire questions here. So
Yeah.
I'll ask them with rapid fire. Try not to give too much commentary, and
Okay.
I'll let you answer them as short as long as you want. So,
Yeah.
what frightens you?
Right now, I'm concerned about how the economy might go and how that's going to impact businesses and their buying decisions. So basically, sales on that, what might happen with wars and technological advances of other countries. But I feel like they're not frightening in a place where they immobilize or paralyze, right? They're things that are frightening that we have to take into account for potential scenarios, but not things that are holding me back or preventing me from making other decisions.
Okay, what inspires you?
I think just seeing the successes of other people and what they've built, I get really inspired by building, creating. Creation's such an amazing thing. I think it's pretty cool to see how, as a kid, it's just really fun to destroy something, right? But as you start to get older, you start to realize how much time and effort it actually took to build something, and you want to destroy less, and you want to create more, and it's something I that really inspires me is just seeing things that have been created over how much time and how beautiful they are.
So outside of this isn't one of my rapid fire questions, but outside of work, are what are you creating?
Outside of work, I mean, I'm creating a family.
Okay.
Creating, I mean, that's probably about it. Creating a nice space to live
Has
in.
the camera been put away indefinitely?
No, I still take it out every now and then. I especially take it out for more astrophotography these days. But
Okay.
um, I mean, when I go hiking, I've got 5 million things for kids or camping that I've got to haul. So the fact of hauling out a big
So throw
clunky
another couple
DSLR
pounds, yeah.
versus my phone, I just take pictures on my phone with that.
Okay.
Um, but yeah,
You used to be a pretty avid photographer, but since Cinch, I know that's kind of taken a
yeah.
pretty heavy backseat for you. But
Well, and I think
um,
AI is going to kill that too. A whole different topic, but like it'd be photography now will just be photography for me. But
yeah, that's an interesting thing, right? Like as a photographer myself, right? Like in looking at that, it is a really interesting thing to see. Okay, how will AI affect, right? Like all creation, right? Like all types of
yeah,
art. And are we ever going to know what's real and what's not, right? Like because right now, like I can go into
yeah,
Lightroom and I can take anything out of my photo really easily, right? Like I can take out grain and I can get things super in focus. But
yeah,
so there's a lot of things that I can do thanks to AI, which help enhance the visual to capture what I saw initially, right? And maybe remove some distractions, but then you can take it to the next level and just have AI create the scene itself, right? Like, and you don't
yep,
even have to go take the picture.
yeah,
So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays, right? What
yep.
gives you hope for the future?
I just I don't know that that's a thing. I I think it's just a part of being, right? Is if I'm here, if I exist, I should be hopeful that my future is going to have something positive in it, right? I mean, certain things might not necessarily be positive, but that the general aspect of my life is going to be better. And it seems like there's always some opportunity to make life better, right? That no matter what situation that we're in, that's what makes a lot of the great movies that we see, these great stories of World War II stories, right? Are the fact that even in some of the bleakest scenarios, and maybe it's easier to be hopeful in the bleakest scenarios, but um, you find people that are hopeful enough that it drives them to take enough action to do things. And I think it's just part of being less than a thing that happens.
Yeah, I don't know if it's easier as much as it's more of a contrast. So it's easier to see that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it stands out more. But no, I think that's a great answer. What's something that you would want to tell your 18-year-old self?
I tell my 18-year-old self to I'd go back to that video streaming. I'd probably tell him to keep an eye on that. all the business things that I've done, and I tell them to invest in a few choice companies and when to get out of investments in other companies.
So
And
you'd take the Biff approach.
yeah, totally. I'd also make sure I kept track of that one USB drive I had my Bitcoin wallet on. Don't lose that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fair.
So, yeah,
That one's gotta hurt. So
yeah, yep.
okay, well, what book are you reading right now?
Oh, right now I'm actually reading The Anxious Generation. Um, I can't remember the author, but it's the same guy who did The Righteous Mind, and
Okay.
it's a really great book, and I think helping me position some of the things I'm going to do with my kids.
No, good. It is like that is something that we are definitely seeing as I don't know if we an epidemic maybe um,
Yeah,
of the current generation coming up. Is there is a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of concern. I think social media and rapid news cycles and a lot of that play into that so much, right? But
yeah.
what book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you'd highly recommend?
I would recommend The Unconquerable Leader. It's actually written by my CEO coach, who I also give a shout out to earlier here, but um, he does a great job at answering and walking through a lot of the things that I'm trying to solve as a leader and aspects of life right now. Um, I also really liked Quit, but that was probably a lot more than 18 months ago I listened to it.
Okay. Well,
So,
that would give us a couple to check out, so that's great. Um, what's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
oh, I love New Zealand. Um, and the reason I love New Zealand was just so much outdoor stuff. I got to go on a really fun trip with my brother. He lived down there, and we spent like 6 weeks just driving around the whole country. So we drove around everywhere, took a
Both
ferry
North
to
and
the
South Islands.
South Island and the little tiny third island, and
Okay.
um, drove around it all and slept in the car, slept in people, met people who let us sleep at their house. It was a pretty epic road trip, camping all kinds of random
That's
places, and
awesome.
made a lot of pretty fun friends. So that was probably my favorite trip.
That's awesome. Yeah, that one's on the bucket list. I haven't been to New Zealand yet, so definitely,
Yeah.
definitely on the list. So I probably can't go for 2 years though. So
Okay.
I gotta wait till my boy gets home from a mission, because he'll be mad if I go to New Zealand without him. So
Well, he can have an adventure at some point in his life. Yeah.
oh, I'd love to go have that adventure with him though. So
Yeah.
um, so anything else you're working on, or just cranking on Cinch? Just that's the focus right now.
Yep. Just cranking on Cinch. Try to figure that out and go from
Awesome.
there.
So if people want to keep up with you, follow you, where can they do it?
Yeah. LinkedIn, Facebook, follow Cinch especially. I don't have a ton of time. I'm posting random things myself, so anything that gets posted, I've got a lot of support in the background helping me post it. So
Okay.
yeah, yep.
Well, awesome,
Uh,
Justin. We appreciate your time
Cool.
today. This was awesome to conclude our episode here of a bit of curiosity. We've got to dive into some fun things. I think starting a business is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of transition that takes place from the time that you get the idea to the time that you're in now, having investors and employees and trying to
Yeah,
run a multi-million-dollar business. So, congrats to you. Keep up the good work. Thanks for your time today.
definitely. Thank you, Jeremy. Have a good one.